Billionaire mocked his wife's pregnancy and left her, but when he saw the child, he collapsed. Power can be a curious illusion, blinding those who hold it until they forget the value of empathy and love. In the glittering heart of Manhattan, a millionaire named Richard Sullivan once believed his wealth granted him an unshakable throne. He was adored for his success, envied for his fortune, and sought for his influence. Yet beneath his refined exterior lurked a heart hardened by greed, unable to understand the tenderness of true family. This moving and unforgettable story follows Richard's descent from mocking his wife's pregnancy to collapsing in awe when confronted by the wonder of his own child. Richard Sullivan was born into a world far removed from hardship. Raised in a grand Victorian home just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, his childhood was a tapestry of opulent parties and private tutors. His father, Harold Sullivan, was a savvy investor who made his fortune during a technological boom, while his mother, Constance, spent her days guiding social committees and overseeing the household staff. Richard's earliest memories involved sumptuous feasts for philanthropic galas, polished silverware glinting under chandeliers, and the distant hum of classical music wafting through corridors lined with family portraits. Even as a child, Richard understood that money commanded respect, or at least a semblance of it. Neighbors always waved enthusiastically when the Sullivan limousine passed by, eager to catch a glimpse of the family deemed Boston royalty. In school, his classmates dared not tease him or question him. His father's power loomed large, and his own budding confidence did the rest. Teachers, too, seemed more lenient, always quick to encourage his talents, whether genuine or imagined. Harold, for his part, admired ambition above all else. From an early age, he made sure Richard recognized that the family legacy was something to preserve, not squander. While other children played soccer or built sandcastles, Richard was taught the art of networking. He was introduced to influential figures at dinner parties and told to listen attentively, picking up on the rhythms of polite conversation. "Connections, my boy. Keep the world turning," Harold liked to say, pressing a supportive hand to Richard's shoulder. Though Constance was more nurturing, her displays of affection were measured. She believed in decorum, so hugs and kisses were bestowed only on special occasions. More often, she taught Richard which fork to use for salads and which for desserts, how to make small talk with the mayor's wife, and why a single wrinkle on a suit could undermine an entire impression. Their home felt more like a grand hotel than a warm family nest, with maids gliding silently through halls and butlers ready at the ring of a bell. Richard learned to equate love with convenience. If he needed anything, someone was always there to provide it. He never worried about allowances or chores. That was for children whose families lacked means. Instead, he found a sense of self-worth in the authority that money granted him. In his eyes, the world was an orchard of opportunities ripe for the picking. He simply needed to reach out and claim them. As he transitioned into adolescence, that sense of entitlement ballooned. His teenage years were a study in indulgence, brand new sports cars on his 16th birthday, lavish vacations to Europe during summer breaks, and the best private schooling money could buy. While he excelled in business-related subjects, mathematics, and even some sciences, his interest in literature or the humanities was superficial at best. He believed that life was about strategy, power, and above all winning. But deep beneath the polished veneer, Richard felt a small, persistent emptiness. He did not fully understand. This nagging sensation hinted that while he commanded the admiration of many, genuine human connection was missing. His parents were often busy, Harold with his empire of investments, Constance with her philanthropic luncheons. There was no late-night storytelling or comfortable, heartfelt conversations about dreams and fears. Emotions were meant to be controlled and harnessed to reinforce one's social standing. Graduating from a prestigious prep school with top marks in economics, Richard moved on to Harvard University. In the hallowed halls and ivy-covered buildings, he recognized a new stage upon which to shine. It was an even larger playground where wealth and success were revered, and he had both in abundance. He joined the most exclusive clubs, dined at the finest restaurants, and entertained visions of carving out his name in the annals of business history. His father's connections smoothed the way, ensuring introductions to influential professors and alumni, paving a path that seemed tailor-made for greatness. Richard savored the constant praise from his peers. He wore his confidence like a tailored suit, always crisp, always immaculate. He gained a reputation for being somewhat arrogant, but also undeniably effective. Group projects soared under his leadership, though he often took more credit than he deserved. Social gatherings were his domain. He was the one who threw the most extravagant parties, who flashed the biggest gestures of generosity. Beneath it all, that flicker of emptiness remained, but he dismissed it as a fleeting weakness, overshadowed by the bright lights of his thriving ambition. Upon graduating at the top of his class, Richard wasted no time entering the business world. He had offers from leading financial institutions and tech firms. Ultimately, he joined an investment banking group on Wall Street, continuing a legacy that traced back to his father's success. His good looks, self-assured grin, and polished manners made him a favorite among clients and colleagues. Promotions came swiftly, as did the money, more money than he ever believed possible. Property in Manhattan's Upper East Side soon followed, along with a glimmering penthouse suite offering panoramic views of Central Park. Life was a whirlwind of deals, parties, and endless social engagements. Though he was still young, he walked with the confidence of a seasoned magnate. People often talked about him in hushed tones, using words like shark or tiger, predators revered for their lethal prowess. Far from offended, Richard loved it. He was unstoppable, ready to devour anything that stood between him and his next triumph. He was also lonely, though he'd never admit it. Genuine friendships were scarce, often replaced by transactional acquaintances. Women gravitated toward him, but he viewed most with a cool detachment, dismissing their affections as mere fascination with his wealth. Real love, he believed, was a concept for poets and idealists. People like him, winners, did not have time for fragile emotions. What mattered was maintaining his status, expanding his empire, and leaving his mark on a world that he believed was his to conquer. And so, well before the age of 30, Richard Sullivan was seen as a rising star in the global financial scene. Yet the deeper he waded into wealth and influence, the further he drifted from any meaningful sense of self. That small hollow in his heart widened, but instead of recognizing its cause, he tried to fill it with even more achievement, more luxury, more external validation. This is the person Richard was before life introduced him to Lily, a woman who would challenge every assumption he'd ever held and eventually lead him down a path where no amount of money could save him from his own revelations. Lily Montgomery grew up far from the corridors of high society that Richard effortlessly inhabited. Her childhood home was a modest two-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York, a world away from Boston's elite enclaves. She was the eldest of 3 siblings, her parents working 2 jobs each just to put food on the table and keep the rent paid. From a young age, Lily learned the value of patience, hard work, and perseverance. Where Richard's childhood was filled with sparkling ballrooms and catered dinners, Lily's was punctuated by rummage sales, homemade birthday cakes, and the bittersweet closeness that comes from a family united in adversity. Despite the financial challenges her family faced, Lily was raised with abundant warmth and love. Her father, a mechanic at a local garage, could fix nearly anything with a determined glint in his eye. Her mother, a part-time nurse, lived by a mantra that embraced compassion above all else. It was not uncommon for Lily to see her mother come home exhausted from a double shift, only to spend her limited free hours volunteering at the church or helping neighbors in need. Lily absorbed these lessons deeply, taking to heart that true richness lay not in a bank account, but in the gratitude earned through kindness and empathy. Unlike Richard, Lily did not excel in a prestigious private school. She attended the local public institutions of her neighborhood, yet she stood out for her inquisitive mind and boundless creativity. Teachers praised her critical thinking skills and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Even at an early age, Lily possessed an innate capacity to sense people's emotional states, and her gentle spirit often made her a confidant to peers struggling with problems at home or academically. She found purpose in being a listening ear and offering small acts of service like sharing her lunch with a classmate who forgot theirs, or organizing study groups to help others catch up. There was never a question of whether Lily would attend college. She was determined to break the cycle of financial strain that plagued her family. Through a combination of scholarships, part-time jobs, and a relentless drive, she secured a place at New York University to study psychology. It was a subject that spoke to her passion for understanding human nature and alleviating the silent struggles people carried within. While her parents worried about the mounting tuition bills, Lily marched forward with unwavering optimism, believing that education was her ticket to a life of greater stability and purpose. During her time at NYU, Lily blossomed into a capable young woman whose kindness and tenacity attracted a diverse circle of friends. Her roommates hailed from different corners of the world, and she embraced every opportunity to learn from their backgrounds. She took on internships, volunteered at crisis hotlines, and even spearheaded a campus mental health initiative to reduce the stigma around anxiety and depression. Professors noted her empathy, lauding her ability to connect with individuals on a deeply emotional level. Though she could not boast the lavish lifestyle that many of her classmates enjoyed, Lily held her head high, motivated by a belief that true success was measured by the positive impact one left on others. It was during her senior year that Lily's life took a detour, one that would ultimately put her on a collision course with Richard Sullivan. A close friend of hers, Regina, had secured a job at a prominent investment firm in Manhattan and was invited to an exclusive networking gala. Knowing Lily's interest in understanding different social spheres and hoping to help her friend acclimate, Regina asked Lily to accompany her as a +1. Lily hesitated. She was neither fond of ostentatious displays of wealth nor comfortable in the company of corporate elites. But Regina was insistent, promising it would be a chance to gain insight, meet new people, and perhaps find potential donors for Lily's mental health initiatives. Reluctantly, Lily agreed. The event was held at the Plaza Hotel, an iconic New York landmark steeped in history and luxury. As she stepped through the ornate lobby, decorated with gilded fixtures and lavish flower arrangements, Lily couldn't help feeling out of place. She wore a simple yet elegant dress she had borrowed from a friend, and while it suited her frame, she felt a hint of self-consciousness among the designer gowns and diamond-encrusted accessories. Still, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Wandering through the ballroom, she observed people conversing in polished tones, sipping champagne, discussing the day's market fluctuations. Their world felt alien yet strangely fascinating. Lily had always been a keen observer of human behavior. She saw masks of politeness concealing a certain competitive tension. Laughter was plentiful but often hollow, driven by a desire to impress rather than a genuine spark of joy. At some point in the evening, while standing near a towering ice sculpture of the New York City skyline, Lily felt a presence beside her. She turned and found herself face to face with Richard Sullivan. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and his posture radiated a cool self-assurance. The black tie complemented his dark hair, and he gave her a brief, assessing glance that seemed to sum her up within seconds. In that fleeting moment, Lily couldn't decide if he was intriguing or off-putting. Regardless, there was something magnetic about his aura, an energy that pulled people to his orbit, whether they liked it or not. Richard, for his part, noticed immediately that Lily did not belong to the usual circle of socialites and heiresses he encountered. Her dress, while classy, lacked a designer label, and her eyes shone not with ambition, but with genuine curiosity. He wondered what someone like her was doing at such a gathering. Perhaps she was arm candy for one of the older financiers? The thought dissipated quickly. There was an authenticity in her posture that defied the usual gold digger stereotypes. Without waiting for an invitation, he introduced himself with a confident smile. Their first conversation was nothing extraordinary, a polite exchange of names and a brief discussion about the glittering ice sculpture that was slowly melting into the shape of the city. It sought to immortalize. Yet, Lily's forthrightness and gentle demeanor intrigued Richard. They spoke longer than either anticipated, talking about her studies in psychology, his background in finance, and the peculiarities of Manhattan's elite social scene. Lily found his world baffling, yet strangely captivating. Richard found her sincerity refreshing, if a bit naive. Though they came from drastically different backgrounds, a mutual curiosity formed an early bridge between them. By the end of the evening, Richard casually suggested they continue their conversation over coffee sometime. Lily hesitated, sensing an undercurrent of arrogance in his manner, but there was also warmth in his eyes, as if he was not entirely the suave, unfeeling shark people rumored him to be. Ultimately, she gave him her phone number, unsure if she'd ever actually hear from him again. Lily left the plaza that night, feeling a swirl of contradictions. Part of her was intrigued, another part wary. Something about Richard's confidence grated on her, reminding her of all the wealthy individuals who never gave her family's struggles a second thought. Yet she had to admit he wasn't entirely devoid of charm or empathy. He'd listened intently when she spoke about mental health outreach, even asking questions that implied genuine interest. Little did Lily know that this unlikely encounter marked the first step in a journey that would test the limits of her kindness and shape the trajectory of her future. For in meeting Richard Sullivan, she had unwittingly ventured into the orbit of a man who believed he could buy anything except, perhaps, the love and resilience she held quietly within her heart. Their first coffee date took place at a cozy cafe near Washington Square Park, a spot Lily chose for its serene atmosphere and proximity to her campus. Richard arrived precisely on time, wearing a stylish blazer that instantly turned heads. Lily, with her hair in a simple ponytail and dressed in a warm sweater, welcomed him with a polite smile. At first, the conversation was cautious, as though both were aware they came from different worlds. Yet, the more they spoke, the more layers they peeled back like strangers, unraveling each other's stories. One thread at a time, Lily learned that while Richard appeared to be the quintessential wealthy bachelor, he also harbored a deep drive to distinguish himself beyond his father's legacy. He shared snippets of his life at Harvard, complete with social victories and quiet disappointments. Occasionally, his voice would carry a hint of wistfulness, as if he recognized something was missing but couldn't articulate what. Lily, in turn, spoke of her family's struggles and her dream to become a clinical psychologist, working especially with underserved communities. She admitted she had reservations about living in a city that glorified materialism, yet she aspired to help those the system often left behind. Richard found her perspective both surprising and compelling. He was used to women who were dazzled by his money or keen to leverage his name. Yet Lily rarely seemed impressed or even interested in his wealth. Instead, she focused on his ambitions, asking if he genuinely enjoyed the fast-paced, cutthroat environment of finance. For the first time in a long while, he felt someone was looking beyond his polished exterior, questioning whether he was happy. It was a question that unsettled him, but he couldn't deny that he liked having it asked. Despite their differences, the date ended on a promising note. Richard insisted on paying, something Lily initially resisted until she conceded with a gracious thank you. He walked her back toward the NYU campus, teasing her about her intense study habits, while she ribbed him for his predictable corporate attire. Before parting, he asked if they could do this again. Lily agreed, albeit with a soft laugh, pointing out that their worlds still felt light years apart. But dates did follow, several of them in fact. They explored the city in ways Lily never had, Richard taking her to rooftop lounges and upscale restaurants, while Lily introduced him to her favorite art galleries and community centers. At a local soup kitchen, Richard experienced a sudden wave of humility as he served meals alongside Lily, watched her smile at the guests, and recognized in her a kind of empathy he had never dared cultivate. She didn't judge him for his privilege, nor did she idolize him for it. She simply encouraged him to open his eyes a little wider, to see the city not just as a playground for the wealthy, but also as a tapestry of human struggle and hope. A slow, cautious bond began to form. Their differences remained glaring. He thrived in a realm of power brokers and strategic alliances, while she cherished intimate human connections and the healing power of compassion. Yet it was precisely these contrasts that intrigued them both. Richard found Lily's grounded perspective a balm, a refuge from the transactional nature of his usual social circle. Lily discovered an intellect in Richard that went beyond the typical stereotypes of a shallow money chaser. He was quick-witted, curious, and capable of moments of surprising tenderness. Inevitably, they faced skepticism from both sides. Richard's friends wondered why he was spending time with someone so far removed from their glittering lifestyle. Lily's friends, on the other hand, warned her to be cautious of a man who might see her as a novelty rather than a genuine partner. Their concerns, while well-intentioned, only strengthened the growing bond. Each new outing, each long phone call into the early hours of the morning, each honest conversation about dreams and fears, wove their lives more tightly together. 6 months into their relationship, Richard invited Lily to a formal dinner hosted by his parents in Boston. Nervous yet determined, Lily stepped into the Sullivan mansion, marveling at the sheer opulence of the place. The floors gleamed with polished marble, portraits of ancestors lined the walls, and the grand staircase spiraled upward like something out of a fairy tale. Constance Sullivan greeted her with politeness, though Lily sensed a careful evaluation in the older woman's smile. Harold Sullivan was more direct. He shook Lily's hand firmly, made a few crisp remarks about her background, then spent the rest of the evening probing Richard about his professional achievements. In truth, Lily felt like an intruder, a sentiment that grew when dinner was served at a long mahogany table adorned with silver candelabras. She managed to keep her composure, maintaining polite conversation and deflecting Harold's thinly veiled questions about her ambitions. By the end of the night, she suspected neither of Richard's parents approved of her, but she also noticed how Richard defended her quietly yet decisively when their questions became too pointed. It was a subtle sign that he was willing to stand up for her, even in the face of old money skepticism. Not long after that dinner, Lily graduated from NYU and began working as an assistant in a mental health clinic in the Lower East Side. Richard, meanwhile, scaled new heights on Wall Street, earning substantial bonuses and global recognition for his financial acumen. Their schedules became more demanding, their worlds more entrenched in their respective paths. Yet they found time, quiet evenings in Lily's modest apartment, leisurely walks through Central Park, spontaneous weekend getaways. The friction between their different lifestyles never dissipated completely, but it softened under the warmth of mutual respect and growing affection. It was during one of these weekend trips, an impromptu drive to the Hudson Valley, that Richard surprised Lily with a question she never expected: "Marry me." They were standing by the edge of a small lake, leaves turning gold around them, a soft breeze ruffling the water's surface. Lily's immediate reaction was a tumble of shock and excitement, followed quickly by a flutter of fear. Marriage was a monumental step, especially with someone as complex as Richard. Yet as she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity, a genuine longing that seemed to transcend the usual bravado. After a moment of breathless consideration, she said yes. The following weeks were a blur of preparation, not for a grand society wedding, but for a more intimate celebration that reflected both their sensibilities. Lily insisted on a small ceremony in a historic chapel upstate, surrounded by close friends, her family, and a handful of Richard's colleagues. Harold and Constance were less than thrilled about the understated nature of the event, but they attended out of obligation and to maintain appearances. They did provide a lavish reception afterward at a nearby estate, complete with a string quartet and gourmet catering. Lily conceded to let them handle those details, understanding it was part of Richard's world, just as the intimate chapel was part of hers. In the end, the wedding was a poignant blend of two distinct universes merging into one. Lily wore a simple lace gown her mother helped sew, while Richard looked every bit the modern groom in a tailored tuxedo. They exchanged vows that spoke of unity in diversity, of respect for each other's values and dreams. There was laughter, tears, and even a hint of hope in Constance's eyes as she watched her son pledge his life to a woman so unlike the debutantes she had once imagined as potential daughters-in-law. Their honeymoon took them to the Amalfi Coast, where pastel-colored villages clung to cliffs above turquoise waters. It was a dreamlike escape from New York's incessant rush. For 2 weeks, they sipped limoncello under the setting sun, wandered through fragrant lemon groves, and basked in the novelty of being newlyweds. Yet beneath the honeymoon bliss lay the unspoken reality that once they returned, they would have to navigate a world that did not always accommodate such a union of differing backgrounds and aspirations. Still, they were hopeful. Love, it seemed, could bridge gaps once deemed impossible. They saw it in each other's eyes every morning, felt it in the shared laughter over private jokes, and experienced it in the gentle comfort of long embraces. Theirs was not a fairy tale, both understood that, but it was real, and it was theirs to cherish, for better or worse. So they returned to New York with hearts brimming with optimism. Lily resumed her work at the mental health clinic, pushing forward with her plans to eventually earn a doctorate. Richard dived back into the high-stakes game of finance, his drive undiminished, but now balanced by the knowledge that he had a partner waiting at home, someone who saw past his wealth and loved him for the man he was, not the name he carried. For a while, life felt harmoniously aligned. They built a life in his penthouse, though Lily made sure to add her personal touch: simple paintings, potted plants, and comfortable chairs for late-night reading. Richard, to his own surprise, found solace in these domestic touches, often returning from a stressful day at the office to find Lily's thoughtful presence capable of dissolving his tensions. Yet nothing remains idyllic forever. Within a year of their marriage, subtle cracks began to appear. Richard's work demands increased, leading him to spend countless evenings and weekends at the office. He still showered Lily with gifts and gestures, but found less and less time for genuine connection. Lily, meanwhile, poured more hours into the clinic, dealing with heartbreaking stories of trauma and homelessness that weighed on her emotionally. While she sought emotional support from Richard, she sensed his patience was waning. The man who once marveled at her compassion now sometimes dismissed her concerns as naive or overly dramatic. Resentments brewed, quiet at first, manifesting as small disagreements that escalated into bigger conflicts. Lily accused Richard of losing touch with the values they once promised to uphold, while Richard retorted that the world was more complex than her idealism allowed. Their arguments left them both drained, longing for the initial spark they had shared, but unsure how to rekindle it in the face of life's mounting pressures. Amid this storm of work obligations and personal conflicts, fate dealt them an unexpected hand. Lily became pregnant. The news came on a Tuesday morning, revealed by a simple home test that bore two unmistakable pink lines. Alone in the bathroom, Lily stared at the indicator with a mixture of awe, terror, and cautious hope. She imagined a child who could embody the best of both worlds, the empathy she so cherished and the drive that fueled Richard. Perhaps this was the blessing they needed, a reason to reconcile and refocus on what truly mattered. But Lily's optimism would soon collide with Richard's reality. For when she timidly shared the news with him that evening, he responded not with the exhilaration she had hoped for, but with skepticism and frustration. In that moment, Lily realized that the man she loved was still deeply entrenched in a world where timing, control, and self-interest overshadowed life's simpler miracles. His eyes betrayed not joy, but alarm, as he measured the implications of fatherhood against the demands of his meteoric career. It was the first sign of a deeper fracture, one that would eventually tear them apart, testing Lily's resilience in ways she never imagined, and sending Richard spiraling into a crisis no amount of wealth could alleviate. The night Lily announced her pregnancy, a strained silence fell over their penthouse. Outside, the city glimmered with its usual electric intensity, but inside, the atmosphere felt dark and suffocating. Lily searched Richard's face for a trace of joy or even surprise, but he wore an expression of controlled panic. She expected questions: "How far along are you? Are you feeling okay?" Instead, he muttered something about the awkward timing and how they needed to think about the bigger picture. It was a phrase that stung Lily's heart, as though their impending child was merely an obstacle on a corporate spreadsheet. In the days that followed, Richard avoided the subject whenever possible. He was always too busy to discuss nursery plans or doctor appointments, often ducking out early in the morning and returning late at night. When Lily finally cornered him one evening, insisting they talk about the future, he sighed in exasperation. "I'm in the middle of a major deal," he snapped. "We'll figure this out later." The look in his eyes spoke volumes. He saw fatherhood as a burden, an unwelcome detour from the meteoric path he had set for himself. For Lily, the initial wave of excitement over her pregnancy gave way to deep anxiety. She was exhausted from her work at the clinic, struggling with bouts of morning sickness, and worst of all, grappling with the realization that the man she married seemed unwilling to embrace this new life. She found solace in small acts of self-care, light walks in Central Park, silent prayers in the chapel near her old campus, the comforting words of her mother over the phone. Each day, her emotional exhaustion increased, fueled by the deafening silence from Richard on a matter that should have been shared joy. When Lily hit her second trimester, she decided to host a small gathering to celebrate the pregnancy. She invited a few close friends and some of her colleagues from the clinic. Though the event was modest, a simple brunch with homemade quiches and fruit salads, Richard treated it like an unwelcome intrusion into his domain. He made a brief appearance, offering obligatory smiles and handshakes, then excused himself under the pretense of pressing work commitments. Lily was left to entertain her guests alone, putting on a brave face while her heart ached at his indifference. Tensions at home escalated, culminating in a series of confrontations that left both parties emotionally bruised. Lily accused Richard of being heartless, more concerned with stock prices and mergers than the arrival of their child. Richard retorted that Lily was being irrational and hormonal, implying that her mood swings were clouding her judgment. "We can hire the best nannies," he argued, as though that alone would solve every complication. His attitude was painfully dismissive, and Lily found herself standing in the kitchen. One night, tears streaming down her cheeks, wondering if she had made a catastrophic mistake in marrying him. Not long afterward, Harold and Constance Sullivan invited them to a high-profile charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Lily, already exhausted and visibly pregnant, had little enthusiasm for such an affair. However, Richard insisted they attend for the sake of appearances, warning Lily not to embarrass him by looking too tired or wearing something that might draw criticism. The words burned. She swallowed her pride, dressed in a gown that she hoped would flatter her growing belly, and accompanied him to the gala with a forced smile. The evening was a whirlwind of polite small talk, glittering gowns, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Lily's feet ached, her back hurt, and not a single person seemed genuinely interested in her pregnancy beyond superficial congratulations. As the night wore on, she excused herself to find a quiet corner and rest. That's when she overheard Richard, standing with a group of wealthy investors, making a joke at her expense. "Pregnancy hormones, you know how women get," he remarked with a smug chuckle, as though her emotional turmoil was a trivial footnote in his glamorous life. Lily's face flushed with a mixture of humiliation and fury. On the ride home, she confronted him about his behavior. Instead of apologizing, Richard doubled down, saying that she was overly sensitive and that she needed to grow a thicker skin if she was going to be part of his world. Something in Lily snapped. She realized this wasn't just about a single insult. It was a pattern, an inability or unwillingness to see her as an equal partner rather than an accessory. The argument escalated to a fever pitch once they reached the penthouse, each one hurling accusations and truths that had been festering for months. "All you care about is your business deals," Lily shouted, tears flowing freely. "What about our child? Don't you feel any responsibility, any love?" Richard's expression hardened. "Love? This child wasn't exactly part of my plan. You think everything is going to be perfect just because you want it to be. I'm the one who has to pay for everything, keep this lifestyle afloat. I can't afford to throw it all away just because you decided you're ready for motherhood." It was a staggering blow, one that took Lily's breath away. In that moment, she felt a cold certainty that Richard's heart was shut to the one thing that mattered most, their child's well-being. She retreated into the bedroom, sobbing into her pillow, feeling more alone than ever. The weeks that followed saw no improvements. Richard continued working long hours, barely acknowledging Lily's changing body or the emotional weight she carried. Finally, one chilly winter evening, the dam broke. Lily found an apartment listing in Brooklyn that offered a modest but comfortable space not far from her workplace. She printed it out, placed it on the dinner table, and told Richard she was considering moving there. His reaction was explosive. He accused her of being melodramatic, of undermining him, of trying to sabotage their marriage. In the heat of the argument, he let slip cruel words that would echo in Lily's mind for a long time. "Maybe I should have married someone who understands what it means to live in my world." Shaken to the core, Lily made a decision that was heartbreaking yet inevitable. She packed a small suitcase and left. In a flurry of tears and turmoil, she hailed a taxi, the city lights flashing by in a disorienting blur. She called a friend from the clinic who offered her a spare room until she could find her own place. Everything felt surreal, as though she were watching another person's life fall apart. Yet amid the sorrow, a quiet resolve bloomed. She might not have the penthouse or the lavish comforts, but she had the strength to protect her child, if only from a father who refused to love it. Days turned into weeks. Richard didn't call, and Lily didn't reach out, fearful of yet another confrontation. She found a small one-bedroom apartment through a friend's recommendation, a walk up in a neighborhood that was far from luxurious but had a vibrant community spirit. The paint was peeling in places and the bathroom needed refurbishing, but it was hers. She placed her hand over her growing belly each night, whispering words of reassurance to the baby. No matter what happened, she vowed, the child would be born into a home filled with unconditional love, even if it was modest and humble. In the midst of this upheaval, Lily's co-workers at the clinic rallied around her. They offered help through a small baby shower where everyone chipped in for essentials like diapers and blankets. She was overwhelmed by their kindness, tears of gratitude mixing with a sense of renewed purpose. For too long she had tried to balance Richard's world with her own. Now, she realized, she needed to focus on building a life that aligned with her values, a life of compassion, honesty, and emotional authenticity. As Lily's due date inched closer, she worked with unwavering resolve. Despite the fatigue, she continued at the clinic, only reducing her hours when her doctor advised her to rest. Each day, the baby's movements inside her reminded her of the profound responsibility she carried, and she found comfort in imagining the day she'd finally hold her son or daughter in her arms. Occasionally, she questioned if she should inform Richard about her medical checkups or involve him in preparations. But then she'd recall his dismissive words, his scornful attitude, and she'd push the thought aside. She refused to subject herself or her unborn child to that toxicity. Winter gave way to spring. Lily stocked up on baby supplies from second-hand stores, carefully washed tiny onesies and blankets, and even set up a small crib in the corner of her bedroom. The space was cramped, but it felt full of potential. She taped an ultrasound photo to her fridge, a daily reminder of the little life that would soon fill her days with laughter and challenges. The question of whether Richard would appear loomed large, but she told herself she was prepared for any outcome. She had to be. And then, just when Lily was starting to believe Richard had erased her from his life altogether, a messenger delivered a stack of legal papers to her door. Inside, she found documents requesting an official separation and financial agreements that outlined child support, should she choose to pursue it. There was no personal note, just a clinical set of terms and conditions, as though her pregnancy were a transaction he sought to settle. The final blow came in the form of a condescending letter from Harold Sullivan's legal team, hinting that any ties Lily might have to the Sullivan fortune were contingent on her silence and discretion. Lily felt physically ill reading those pages. The man she once believed she loved, whose gentle side she had glimpsed in rare, intimate moments, was now distancing himself from the life they had created together. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of her emotional turmoil, no sign that he cared about the child's future beyond a generic financial safety net. She tore up the papers and spent the night crying, anger and sorrow warring in her heart. As if her body sensed the emotional tumult, contractions began 2 weeks early. Lily found herself doubled over in pain, alone in her tiny apartment. She called her friend from the clinic, who rushed her to the nearest hospital. Fear coursed through her veins, but also a steely determination. She would face childbirth on her own if she had to. No part of her wanted to involve Richard, not after he had made his disdain so painfully clear. The labor was arduous, stretching over what felt like an eternity of pain, sweat, and emotional catharsis. In a moment of sheer vulnerability, Lily remembered the nights she and Richard had spent talking about the future. back when love seemed enough to conquer any obstacle. Tears blurred her vision. She felt a pang for what might have been, but also a rising gratitude for the tiny soul about to come into the world. In the early hours of a quiet morning, Lily gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When she first held him against her chest, a wave of love, unlike anything she had ever known, washed over her. She named him Gabriel, after the archangel who symbolizes strength and hope. At that moment, she realized she had all the strength she needed. No mansion or fortune could replace the pure bond she felt with her child. Richard Sullivan was nowhere near the hospital, and Lily was almost relieved. She focused on cradling Gabriel, marveling at his soft cries and the delicate curve of his fingers. This was her reality now, single motherhood, forged by adversity, yet fortified by a love so profound that it made her past anguish feel distant, almost inconsequential. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead, but she felt ready, buoyed by the knowledge that she was bringing her child into a world where empathy and determination could triumph over even the darkest circumstances. Thus, Lily embarked on a new chapter, one defined not by a millionaire's lavish whims or grand illusions, but by the steadfast, unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Little did she know that fate would eventually thrust Richard back into her life in a way neither of them could have foreseen. And when that day came, he would come face to face with the son he had once dismissed, his entire worldview collapsing under the weight of a father's long overdue reckoning. Gabriel's arrival brought a new rhythm to Lily's life, one dictated by feedings, diaper changes, and the gentle lullabies she sang to soothe her son. Each day was a lesson in adaptability, exhausting, at times overwhelming, but also filled with moments of pure wonder. The tiny apartment felt alive with possibility. Gabriel's presence lent a purpose that overshadowed the peeling paint and worn carpet. Lily poured all her love and energy into creating a nurturing environment, determined that her child would never question whether he was cherished. Though she received no calls or visits from Richard, her friends and colleagues continued to provide a supportive network. They organized meal trains, took turns babysitting, and brought Lily groceries when she was too tired to shop. Bit by bit, Lily regained her strength, stepping back into part-time work at the clinic. Balancing single motherhood with her job proved challenging. Sleepless nights left her dizzy with fatigue, and finances were perpetually tight, but she found a sense of pride in her independence, a validation that she could indeed stand on her own. Almost a year passed in relative peace. Gabriel had just turned 11 months old when a sudden shift in Lily's world occurred. The mental health clinic where she worked announced major budget cuts, forcing them to lay off several staff members. Though Lily was well liked and respected, her position as a part-timer made her an easy target for downsizing. She returned home that day with a heavy heart, unsure how she would cover rent or keep up with the increasing costs of childcare. Desperate for solutions, Lily confided in her supervisor, who suggested she reach out to potential donors or philanthropic organizations. The name Rockefeller Foundation was floated, a real and prominent institution known for supporting various social initiatives. Lily sent proposals and letters of inquiry, hoping someone would take an interest in funding a program that provided mental health services in low-income neighborhoods. She also began freelancing as a consultant, offering workshops on emotional well-being for nonprofits, though the pay was modest and irregular. Word of her struggles eventually reached a few of her old college friends, who invited her to attend a high-level networking event in Manhattan. There'll be philanthropists and corporate executives, people with deep pockets who might fund your ideas, they reasoned. Lily hesitated, remembering how out of place she had felt at similar gatherings in the past. But Gabriel's needs were growing, and her finances were dwindling. Pride had to take a back seat to practicality. On the evening of the event, Lily wore a simple black dress she had owned for years, Taking time to polish her shoes and apply a touch of makeup, she left Gabriel in the care of a trusted neighbor, promising to return as soon as possible. Stepping into the gala, she was again confronted with the swirl of designer suits and glittering gowns. The setting was lavish, filled with people engaged in conversations about business ventures and charitable contributions. Lily felt a sense of déjà vu, as though she were back at the Plaza Hotel the night she first met Richard. Mingling cautiously, she introduced herself to potential donors, explaining her vision for accessible mental health care. Some listened politely, asking for contact information. Others dismissed her politely, too wrapped up in their own agendas. While sipping a glass of water near a marble pillar, she overheard a voice that made her heart jolt. Richard Sullivan. He was standing just a few feet away, engaged in an animated conversation with a group of executives. He looked every bit the polished financier she remembered, exuding confidence, his hair impeccably styled, his suit seemingly molded to his frame. Lily's pulse quickened. She hadn't seen or spoken to him since the bitter night she left the penthouse. Torn between the impulse to flee and the urge to confront him, she froze, gripping her glass so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Just as she mustered the courage to slip away unnoticed, his gaze swept across the crowd and landed on her. Time seemed to stand still. Shock registered on Richard's face, followed by something Lily couldn't decipher: regret, surprise, maybe even longing. He excused himself from the group and approached her cautiously, as though she were a fragile relic he dared not break. In a halting voice, he greeted her, asking how she had been. Lily's guarded expression spoke volumes about her emotional armor. Part of her wanted to tell him off, to unleash the pent-up anger and hurt that had accumulated over more than a year. Instead, she settled for a curt reply that she was doing fine, and that her life had moved on. Richard looked at her for a long moment, then asked if they could speak privately. Reluctantly, Lily agreed, leading him to a quiet corridor away from the crowd. There, beneath the soft glow of ornate wall sconces, he told her he had heard through mutual acquaintances that she had a child, his child. He chose his words carefully, as though testing the waters of her forgiveness. The conversation that followed was filled with tension, both raw and unfiltered. Lily did not sugarcoat her struggle, nor did she emphasize her triumphs. She simply stated facts. She was raising Gabriel alone, working tirelessly to provide for him, and had received no support, emotional or otherwise, from Richard. Richard listened, his eyes downcast. Lily noticed a subtle change in him, an earnestness that felt genuine. He explained that after she left, he had buried himself in work, convincing himself that fatherhood was an impossibility given the demands of his career. He admitted he was terrified of losing control, of failing at something so deeply personal. But as time wore on, an undeniable sense of emptiness plagued him. Deals, wealth, and accolades no longer filled the void. He had tried to reach out indirectly, sending those legal documents, which in hindsight had been a terrible, impersonal gesture. He confessed he had acted like a coward. Lily listened in silence, her emotions a tempest. Part of her recalled the man who had once shown glimpses of kindness, who had walked beside her in a soup kitchen, who had proposed by a quiet lake. Another part only remembered the cold sneers, the mockery, the nights she cried herself to sleep in a cramped apartment, pregnant and alone. Then Richard hesitantly asked to meet Gabriel. He didn't demand it, nor did he offer money in exchange. He simply asked for a chance to be a father, however belated. Lily hesitated, torn between her protective instincts and the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. Ultimately, she agreed to let him visit their apartment the following weekend. She made no promises of reconciliation or forgiveness. This was about Gabriel, about giving him the opportunity to know his father if Richard could prove himself worthy of that role. They parted ways with an awkward hug, each unsure what the future held. As Lily returned home, she felt her heart pounding with a tumult of emotions, uncertain if she was walking into a new beginning or setting herself up for another heartbreak. The weekend arrived faster than she anticipated. Lily straightened the living room, trying to make the worn furniture appear inviting. Gabriel, now almost a toddler, toddled around holding a stuffed bear. When the doorbell rang, Lily's chest tightened. She opened the door to find Richard standing there, a tentative smile on his face and a small toy truck in his hand. His expensive suit clashed with the humble surroundings, but he seemed to take no notice. He stepped inside, glancing around, clearly absorbing the life Lily had built without him. The moment Gabriel waddled over, gazing up at the stranger with curious eyes, something inside Richard seemed to snap. He lowered himself to the floor, meeting Gabriel at eye level. For a heartbeat, father and son regarded each other, one with innocence, the other with overwhelming remorse. Lily watched, arms crossed protectively, ready to intervene if things went awry. But Gabriel simply reached out for the toy truck, and Richard smiled, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. What happened next was not a grand spectacle, but a quiet, shattering moment of realization. Richard scooped Gabriel into his arms. The toddler squirmed for a second before settling, clearly intrigued by this new person. And then Richard wept softly, but uncontrollably. Years of denial, guilt and isolation seemed to crash over him all at once. His tears fell onto Gabriel's hair, and he clung to the boy as though he were a lifeline. Lily stood nearby, eyes moist, witnessing the collapse of a man who had once prided himself on never letting the world see him sweat. In that moment, Richard Sullivan finally understood the gravity of what he had missed, the immensity of the love he had forfeited for so long. The sight of his son, his own flesh and blood, pierced through every wall of pride he had built around himself. It was a reckoning, as though the universe had conspired to humble him in the most profound way possible. Lily felt a swirl of compassion and cautious optimism. She knelt beside Richard, gently placing a hand on Gabriel's back. The three of them formed a small circle of trembling hope. For the first time in a long while, Lily allowed herself to believe that maybe their story could take a different turn. Yes, there would be complicated conversations, apologies, and boundaries to establish. But as she watched Richard cradle Gabriel with tearful reverence, she sensed that something fundamental had shifted. Now, they stood on the cusp of a new chapter, one where resilience, connection, and personal growth could potentially triumph over past wounds. Though no one could predict the road ahead, they each found themselves filled with a cautious belief in the redemptive power of love. After all, sometimes the most unlikely hearts do find a way back home, even if the journey is fraught with pain and remorse. And so, in the quiet of that afternoon, in a modest apartment that smelled of baby powder and second-hand furniture, a family began to heal, one tearful embrace at a time. Stories like Richard and Lily's reveal how even the most distant hearts can find redemption through unconditional love. When faced with life's toughest challenges, we discover that genuine emotion triumphs over pride, and family bonds transcend all barriers. Their journey reminds us that wealth, while powerful, is hollow without compassion. It's a call for every one of us to look inward, cherish our loved ones, and find the strength to let forgiveness guide us toward peace. In watching their struggles and ultimate reconciliation, we see that true growth arises from vulnerability and the willingness to change. No one is truly beyond redemption if they choose to face the truth. If this story deeply moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that inspire profound change in our lives and remind us of our shared humanity.